Hey everybody, thanks for joining. We're still waiting for some folks to log in, so bear with us. We'll get started in about a minute or two. That's still on my slides. We're good on that, right? The screen share.
Yep, full screen.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so for those of you just joining, we're going to get started in just about a minute or so. We're still waiting for some folks to sign in, so hang tight. I think we're good to get started if you guys want to. So thanks for coming. This is our Atomic Friday. We've got a really cool set of topics today around a particular threat group and how to take those techniques that group uses. So I'm Casey Smith. I'm here with Mike and Keith. Brian's in the background manning the AV stuff. So thanks for joining us. And let me kind of go over real quick our agenda. So if this is your first time joining us for Atomic Friday, thanks for taking the time out of your day to participate with us. Couple of housekeeping things. Keith's going to be running point on questions. So those of you who are like in our Atomic Slack channel, or if you have questions on Twitter, DM Keith or ping Keith, and he'll take point on those. And then this is being recorded, and so we should be all set to go to post later in case you're watching it and didn't get to see it live. So, and a couple things on our agenda. We're going to cover how to collect information on a particular threat group, how to develop atomic tests associated with that group, and then how to measure your coverage. And again, if you're new to Atomic Red Team and looking for a place to start, atomicredteam.io is a really good link. It has references to our GitHub page, our Slack community, and a lot of getting started guides. So kind of turn it over to you at this point, Mike, and we'll keep going.
Cool, man. Thanks. So yeah, we're just gonna kind of hop into the first piece here, which is collecting Tradecraft. And so every time we look to work on a new chain reaction or try to learn more about a group, we have like a pretty simple like set of questions that we always ask, and we try to have like an amount of like behaviors we want to look for. And so we know that in order to create a chain reaction in, like, say this particular threat group, APT28, we know they do like a lot of execution, and they go down the different tactics, obviously from beginning to end with delivery, down to, objective or C2 and everything like that. And so, Casey, if you want to flip to the next slide, we look to kind of like cover like, when we started looking at APT28 in particular, we started collecting all the data and looking at different threat reports, and we started gathering a lot of them straight from MITRE on the group 7 page, so APT28's page. And then as we started collecting it, this particular case is like, what would happen if this happened to us? So if you're an organization and you were starting to look at this data, or you read a report on them, what would happen if this happened to us, as far as would we have coverage for this, for their behaviors in my environment? Are there any particular techniques that they perform that we may not have coverage for? And this kind of goes right into your chain reaction that you would end up building. And so there's a lot of reports that go back with APT28. There's some really good ones even from 2016. There's a lot of activity from like FireEye and everybody who writes about these guys, and there's just so much behavior. And so that's always like a question I have too, is when I build a chain reaction on a group, am I looking for older behavior? Am I looking for, their behavior that was just reported like a month ago? And then from execution, or from gathering at that point, what do we have today in Atomic Red Team that I can just take now and start simulating that behavior? Or is there something new that I need to add back to Atomic? Casey?
Yeah, and I would add too, so like, kind of like you're saying there, like, what, what are the tests we have? And then as adversaries adapt and new things come out in new reports, if we don't push an update in time, we'll go over some of the YAML structure later. It's pretty quick to add a new test from a report, and we'll talk a little bit about how you might do that. So take something described in a report and then move it into an atomic test. Absolutely.
Yep.
So we have a question we wanted to pose like to the group, like just to kind of poll the audience, like what other questions do those of you who are on, like what do you ask when you read a threat report? Like what comes up? So if you guys have questions, this is really to you, the audience. What sort of things are you interested in a report when you read it, if that makes sense? So I'll kind of pause and let people surface any questions that may come up. Maybe you don't have questions. Maybe you just read the report and you're ready to.
Everything's good from here.
That's fine. I mean, different people have different interests. Like, as you know, would this group be interested in us? Would they be interested in part of our supply chain or customers we service? There's a lot that comes up there. We could dive in a lot on that. Instead, this time we tried to focus specifically around some of the atomic related parts of this, but just keep in mind there's a whole real process and art to taking threat intelligence and distilling it to your organization to make it operational and actionable. So
I think too, from like our backgrounds as well, like I worked at a multinational organization, right? We had interest in China and we had organizations all across Europe and everything. But like, it's a great question to even ask. Like, if it happened to us, would we have visibility into it? You know, like we had some companies who had visibility in the network, and then some who had like EDR products and whatnot. So it's tough because, and I think it goes to our data sources slide here in a minute, but it's tough to like have so much coverage or have so little coverage. How do you have visibility enough and whatnot in there?
Yeah,
looks like you have a question or nope. All right.
I think some folks are just getting some mechanics. Yep.
Hey, Casey, I would say like for our part, it's like the questions that I know that we've asked, and this is kind of it's a model that a lot of organizations use, which is like you kind of already alluded to some of it, which is like, is this thing in my threat model, right? So to what degree do I need to worry about it? And then after that, it's just like, the next two immediate questions are just like right down to detection, right? Like what behaviors do they have that we can key in, and what specific indicators they have, right? And like effectively, behaviors being, I think, the harder thing for adversaries to change, indicators being a little bit more like timely, but also, can help to shortcut detection. So.
Yeah. Awesome. That's perfect. Yep. Yeah. So those are some really good like ideas. I think we'll kind of dive into now some of the, so what we're going to get into, while it's specifically focused on this group, APT 28 or group 7 as MITRE categorizes them, a lot of what we're going to do could be applied to any group or any report you might read. So I'll kind of touch on this just real quick. The MITRE page has a groups page. So this particular group is 0007. And you can, from that group, just pull out the techniques that they use. And that's really what Atomic is about. We're about the different tests that describe or put into action a MITRE technique. And so again, a huge shout out. MITRE has done the groundwork to collect and report and surface all of this. So that's not a red canary thing. That's something MITRE's done. But really, at the end of the day, these are just arrays of techniques, right? It's a list. And that makes it really easy then to start analyzing and then putting into an Atomic test. So just a note, if you're watching offline or whatever, you haven't ever been there, simply go to the MITRE page, go to groups, and you'll find a particular group. And then you can burn through the list of all the different techniques. So this is a really interesting one I pulled up just this morning. I wanted to see, okay, so given a group, what coverage do we have in Atomic? And so we had about 31 of the 48 techniques that were listed on that page. So a pretty good start for coverage. And so we'll get into some of the specifics in a moment, but this is really just something we can do in Excel. We'll show you some scripts a little bit later just to simply take, using the MITRE API, go pull that group down, pull down their techniques, map them together. And then the one thing that we probably ought to do, maybe Mike and I can do this, is add into an Atomic a way to like just, take the set of things that we have tests for. So I've marked those up. We'll publish this a little bit later, but we've got things like credential dumping, very popular technique. We've got 4 or 5 different tests in there to give you different dimensions to credential dumping. So things like running a credential dumping tool, or maybe you're doing a process dump on LSAS. There's a couple different ways attackers will go after credentials, and so we'll show you some examples of that in a little bit. We have a rootkit. Sean, a while back, wrote a cool rootkit called Puppet Strings, which uses a driver exploit. So if you want to see how to hide a process, and there's some cool stuff in there in Atomic, I think, that would be considered pretty advanced. Again, just a reminder, always only run these on test systems that are instrumented with your telemetry collection piece. So I added a couple of things in there, like I noted on T1040, as far as like packet capture. We right now have a test in there that is specific to like having Wireshark or T-Shark on the box, but we could actually add a NetSH trace, which is kind of a cool way to natively collect packets and bind them back to a process. So anyway, questions on that, on our coverage, or any comments, additional comments, Mike or Keith, on just like things we have in Atomic that are related to this group?
We have quite a bit, and which is awesome, and it really helps when you want to build a chain reaction to mimic all of it. And I think a couple things that I caught, and I'll catch on to that in a bit, is like on the network side for these guys, like their C2 and whatnot is like a really interesting behavior. But yeah, I definitely think we did pretty good. Just for what we have, we did pretty well.
Yep. And I would also just remind people, a lot of these tests are like benign in the sense that they may lead to an execution of calc or something like that, which is fine. We're studying a lot of the observations and telemetry. It doesn't necessarily have to be something specific to a tool. Like we don't necessarily have access to this group's binaries to emulate. So, and then bootkit, if you guys want to write and submit a PR for a bootkit, we'll take it. I'm not going to write that thing and ship it. Good luck. There are bootkits out there. Stoned Bootkit was one of my favorites, but I'm not gonna publish that. All right, let's get into data sources. So I'll just pause there and check in with Keith. Thumbs up. Are we good? Any questions or any input? Or
no, I think I was actually going to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure I know the answer to, but a lot of these, a lot of the techniques are obviously Windows heavy, and a lot of the test coverage. But some of these tests span like multiple platforms, particularly the ones we have coverage for. So APT28 as a group, predominantly Windows focused. Do they do some things on the Mac? Is it like any other operating systems that we have coverage for that they dabble in?
It's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Like I know as far as the Windows, like we'll filter some of our execution frameworks. You can filter by OS, but I'd probably have to follow up and see like what if anything's come out lately on a particular, like say Mac OS or Linux. But I don't know. Actually, it's a great question.
Cool.
Yeah, I just randomly checked on the MITRE page for them under the group page, and they do have a X-Agent OS X that they've used before.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. So so kind of tying back into that. So one of the things that you can do with any of the techniques, so you have at a high level, you have the group, and then you have an array of techniques, and you can drill down to any technique. I'm a big fan of the data sources. I've talked about this before. For any technique, MITRE describes for us the data sources you need to observe a thing. And so this is a screenshot just from their page. I'll reference some research, or not really research, but analysis we've done to see which data sources lead to the coverage for most of these techniques. But you can see here for like credential dumping, you're going to want API monitoring, process monitoring, potentially PowerShell logs, and command line parameters. So all of those would be important data sources. So this is where we took, if what you're looking at here was take the data sources associated with the techniques for this group, and let's just stack them up in a pivot table in Excel. This is not anything really fancy, and see which data source provides us the most visibility. And process monitoring stands out really quick, is also file and command line as well. So just a reminder, you can get process and command line right out of the Windows OS with the new event log and process auditing. So those are really, really helpful. if you're just getting started, or tools like Sysmon or other tools. So, okay, I think so any questions on that? But that's kind of a neat way to take a group and then start looking at what are the dimensions of those techniques that allows me to observe them. And so these are the different components or inputs that we would need to source an attack. We may want to be able to collect those and analyze those data sources. All right, Mike, I'll let you talk a little bit about some of the specifics here.
Cool. Yeah. So a lot of when I started looking into it a little bit more, I was just curious. I wanted to at least show a little bit of, when I'm looking at these Intel reports or reading more on MITRE, things that I'm looking for when I look at a chain reaction is, how much do we want to mimic these guys? And so I look at file names. Every time I read through a report, I'm curious the file names that they're writing to disk, if they have a special, when they're zipping up all the files on your file system, collecting things and they're staging it, what are they using? Is it just like Microsoft.zip, whatever it is? I try to gather all that, whatever they're putting into like the registry, if they're adding anything to registry keys or whatnot, I want to know what that is. So then at least when we're creating a chain reaction, we can at least mimic it to be as spot on as possible. If they're running something on the command line, that's a really easy one to mimic with Atomic. And then like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, is do I want to mimic their older behavior or some really like fresh behavior that just came out? And then like how advanced, like, are we going to go off and generate that boot kit, or drop in a new rootkit in there, or whatever we want to do to this to really mimic this on a VM or something? How persistent do we want to be? And again, if publishing something like that could go all kinds of different directions, but at least just like executing what they would execute to mimic a rootkit being loaded might almost just be enough to show the behavior happening on the command line. And then at least you can confirm coverage from just basic behaviors like that.
Or even if you, like you said, even if you're just trying to copy the pattern, like I think you mentioned like DDE execution through Office products was one of their techniques. So it doesn't necessarily have to be their payload where when you're trying to test and observe these things, it could just be something to chain Excel or Office to a DDE execution to the child or something. So,
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and then so you flip to the next one here. It was easy enough to pretty much just go straight to MITRE and look at the references for this group. And I just searched for 2019 because I was like, well, show me the latest information. And so on the right, you kind of see there's 3 reports down here at the bottom that have 2019 in them. And then if you scan the page, you'll see like older ones in there from 2015. I was kind of clicking through a bunch of different ones earlier, even this morning, just kind of curious, like, we look at some of the old FireEye ones and just like the information we knew about these threat actors back then, even up till like right now, it's really interesting. But it also shows like the advancement of the monitoring that we had back then compared to what we have today, and how we're really able to see their behaviors today on like an environment with an EDR product or someone who's really monitoring things and the intel that they're pulling out from their behaviors. So that's where I started.
It's probably. Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, it's probably just worth noting, like one of the questions we get a lot, Mike, is like, how do you take all of this data? And that's, I think we're just trying to give you guys a shout back to MITRE. Like they've done the groundwork. They pulled it all together for sure.
Yep. Saves the time and, a lot of the time. It's easy to one place. And so this is just from one of the more recent 2019 reports. And like I was mentioning, when I'm looking for those registry values, or if I see file names or whatnot, this is just a screen cap. So in this particular case, they're putting in the run key here, Google indexer, and so that's just something that when I'm going through and I want to create that, just a reg modification, I'll just put that in there just so it mimics it. It doesn't mean like I actually wrote a full piece of malware or anything like that is going to do this. I'm just going to create a reg mod and just have that pop right in there just so it looks like it. And then we can also go through.
Yeah, those are the things we have those tests for. So like, it's pretty easy to put a binary, any binary. You could compile this to hello world .NET and put it into that app data platform path. would you be able to observe something executing from a user profile path, or would you see the file put down on disk that was a PE file, or would you see the registry mod? Like those are all those areas of the data sources we'd want to see. Yep.
And then, so Palo Alto, which I didn't document on our slides, but Palo had some really solid intel on their more recent macros, like you mentioned, the DDE stuff. And so if we wanted to create a macro doc, right? So Palo literally gave you everything practically. And so in our particular case, we wouldn't want to put anything malicious out there. So we would just pop in like calc as far as the execution. But like you can go to Pan's blog and grab the macro, the DDE piece, paste it into doc if you wanted to mimic it pretty much completely. Probably what I would do if I wanted to stage it internally for me, I would take that macro, put in a PowerShell download in there to download like another stage from the atomic repo or something, just to like simulate more behavior on the network side. So it's downloading something, and then probably make it to where it would like post out something as well. It could just be generic like fat data or some kind of weird base64 data that they would do as well, just to mimic it on the network. So that gives me the DDE execution on the macro, or DDE from a Word doc. And then I also have the downloads. I see PowerShell downloads. I get that netcon happening, going out to a website, downloading something. And then I am also going to have it like post just a base64 string out to like example.com, just to mimic a ton of data. Yep. And so now check my network stuff, check my EDR stuff or sysmon stuff, whatever it may be on the endpoint side. There's just a lot of information to happen there, which helps a lot for one to simulate these guys or anybody.
Awesome. Yeah, and I don't know, I think everybody may or may not be familiar with DDE, but it's essentially just a way to like put commands and formulas that execute not via macros, but yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep, real clean.
All right, so we're ready to dive into the chain reaction here. Any questions as we switch into like sort of collecting the information, analyzing the data sources, and now we're getting into the actual atomic piece, but I'll just pause and see if there's any inputs or questions. I saw something come through, but it may be okay.
I think we're good right now.
Thanks. All right, cool. All right, so in here, we kind of touched on this, and Mike described the techniques that we can get from this particular group. Most of these, I don't know if anybody has any questions on these, but things like token manipulation is a very common pattern that crosses multiple groups. I think one of the things you'll find is as you build up your tests for a single group, you find that you end up getting coverage for multiple different actors using the same technique. So changing a token would make you go from, say, user to system to allow you to access different parts of the operating system on Windows, for example. Or COM hijacking is another technique in this particular group uses, where essentially you're able to take advantage of the fact that COM often checks the user hive first before the system hive. And so if you can put something in there when an object is created, the operating system will create one for that user. So there's some good data in there in our Atomic Red team on how to perform and simulate a COM hijack. So, so that's the list, right? So there's all sorts of these different techniques there that we've already touched on. And then I'll let you talk a little bit about this, Mike, the playbook and how some of these tie back to their specific tooling. So,
yeah. So Roberto Rodriguez at SpecterOps keeps the Threat Hunter playbook pretty up to date. And so this is just a screenshot from APT28's there. And there's a lot of references. It's really nice because it references back if they have it under like their software, like for Core Shell or whatnot. But you can go through the whole thing for APT28. You'll see a little bit more details on the right under the description of what they're doing as far as like DLL rights or DLL names, and the types of behaviors related to it. And then the tools here in the middle cover the different types of tools either APT28 either made or is reusing from other actors or other groups out on the internet and whatnot. And then obviously the technique and the tactic on the left here. But pretty simple. So these two combined is kind of how I would use this to start to write. Like if I wanted to create a whole new chain reaction just for APT28 and all the behaviors. And so when I start to decide, I don't know whether I'm going to use PowerShell or a batch script or whatever it may be. But this is like a skeleton of how I start to write these. And so I start with just like giving me the technique ID number and then the name of it. So like automated collection. This is super skeleton. And I'll just start reading reports, going through. So like you see in the middle under T1074 for data staged, they used a file called pi.log. And so what I start to do is I'll start to formulate my chain reaction to kind of follow steps. So it'll say, collect data off the environment, so automated collection, find data, collect data, drop it into a pi.log file, and then I will start to do like data compress. I'll zip it up, and then that'll be the thing that I would like exfil out of my environment. So this is like how I start to stage it. The final one looks a lot different because I have all my commands in there and everything like that. And so I'll have that published. Hopefully by Monday, I'll get the rest of it completed. But I'll have everything in there. Obviously, we don't have a boot kit, so I'll remove that from my chain reaction.
Cool.
Or do we? Do we have one?
We don't have a boot kit. Nope.
Yeah. Not to be published.
Yeah, so that's good. So there's probably a number of ways that people can put these together. So you have the script language or script engines on the host, so PowerShell, VB scripts, even batch files. One of the things that we wanted to show a little bit, if you haven't already seen, is the execution frameworks that are built into Atomic Red Team. So really excited about this one. It didn't take too long to put this together, but just to kind of showcase some of the things that are happening. There's a lot going on this slide, but in the beginning there on line 5, we simply take the name of the technique that's described on the group page and just jam those into an array, a comma separated list of technique names. Now, the nice thing is the Atomic Red Team structure follows the same IDs that are used throughout MITRE. And so on line 11, we can basically just say for every single item in that list, we're going to go through and we're going to take the technique name, so T1003 for this example, and you'll notice that we use that variable 3 times on that line. You'll see it there for the name of the variable. So we're going to create a variable called T1003. We're going to then put it in 2 locations for the path and the name of the YAML file, which we can talk about if anyone has questions on those. But that's really the structure. All of these tests are described in the YAML. It will then create the object of the test and as variables. And then you can really do what you want at that point. You could sequence them differently. You could delay them. You could execute them against a remote machine. So you're not really bound to what I'm doing here, but in this situation, I'm just going to generate the test. So maybe I'm not ready to run them right away. So you'll notice on line 16, I can then invoke the atomic test, and then I use the TAC generate only, which is just going to print the command line that would have executed for that particular test. So that's really nice. Some people want to stage a test in one location and then move it into another environment. The 2 things that really make this nice are the get atomic technique and invoke atomic test, which abstracts away all of that complexity for a test. I'll probably just jump over real quick, Mike, and show that like the YAML real quick.
Yeah, TC, while you're doing that, there's a question like related that came in. So, okay. How much does it matter, or how much do we care about like the order of operations when we prepare these tests?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to a degree it does matter because if you start zipping up things and exfiltrating before you're actually dumping credentials and things like that, I probably will go back and sequence these. I did not do that in that particular example, but it's a really good question because I think it does matter because what you're really looking for is that often a chain or a sequence that these don't happen in isolation, right? So you don't just all of the sudden out of nowhere apparate and dump credentials. You have to get initial access on that machine. So I think a better way to model these would be to use some sort of sequencing. It's a really good point. Yep. Which I just haven't done yet. So we'd love your PR. We'll give you a t-shirt if you send it in and you'll be all set. Gear, send you some gear. But yeah, so like kind of back to that code, if you look here, you can see that the get atomic technique is going to take a YAML file. And just to demystify that, each of the different techniques here, each test, so we have like in this situation, T1002 has multiple atomic tests. You can see them broken up into the name blocks here, kind of collapse some of this down. And each of those, so within a test, just to point out, there could be a subset of tests. So like these tests are not specific to Windows. The PowerShell framework right now automatically filters those out. But in case you're running it, like Keith mentioned earlier, on other operating systems, then you would just be aware of that attribute. So that's kind of fun. So then you can just create that. Just a quick reminder for those of you who may be new, when we describe, for example, a variable like output file, all of those are referenced and substituted later on. So you have complete flexibility here. Like Mike was mentioning, like, well, maybe this group outputs a file to something called pi.log, and in our test, we're using data.zip. You could change it, right? So that's the thing that just wanted to call that out. So, yeah, I think.
Yeah, I'd also add to that if you do end up modifying, create a new part in that YAML. So create a new test and just submit that as a PR, just so we have it.
Yep. Let me give you 1 second, Mike. If you want to talk for just a minute, I'll just run this with live. I think people like to see it rather, so it's not just sort of slideware. So give me just a second here.
Sure. So you're gonna execute this one right now.
Yeah, awesome. Give me 1 second.
Cool, man.
Why not, right?
Yep. Fresh data never hurts.
Right on my Red Canary connected system. If any alerts go off, Keith, we know we've got.
You got that lateral movement piece built in here too, right?
Yeah, it's going live. So
MS 17010, right?
Yeah. So you can see here, it's going to go through. In this situation, it went out, downloaded Mimikatz, dumped the creds, like trying to write files. So you can see, I ran this a little bit earlier. I can overwrite or not, but it'll go through and run some tests. It'll try and overwrite some logon scripts. Those are typically for like domain joined accounts. But anyway, that's would be the output. And then we'll talk about in a moment, like how you would measure and take those results of those atomic tests into your environment. Some of these files I don't have on my machine. That's what some of these errors are. So, yep.
Casey, question related to that one that came in. So you're just doing that on an individual VM, not even a big lab environment?
Right. Yeah. So one of the things about Atomic that we've always had is there's no infrastructure required for the Atomic Red Team. So all you really need is to set up a VM. You can get free like test development VMs from Microsoft. And then probably the key is just instrument that with whatever your organization uses to collect telemetry, so that you have a really good model for, I'm going to run a bunch of things, and if I'm monitoring processes, it should be as close as your production environment would be. But we always encourage people to only run those on test systems. Sometimes you'll get different alerts on different security products, which is that it works. But yeah, exactly. Just a straight VM.
And any suggestions for folks that are setting up a lab, like any shortcuts to doing that type of thing, or like stuff you'd recommend for a more sophisticated test?
Well, we like Detection Lab here. If you got something, Mike, is that what you're going to say? Or
yeah, I was just going to say Atomic just got pulled into Detection Lab. So now you can deploy Detection Lab, gives you, 4 or 5 Windows VMs. You get a domain control.
Windows VMs and a Linux machine. Yep.
Yeah, so you get everything all set up, and Atomic's already built in now, which is great. So now you can execute everything within a really pretty decent live fire environment. Everything's logged as well, so it'll ship everything right to a Splunk on the logger machine, so you can also query everything and learn things that way. See Windows Event Forwarding in action, Windows ATA, and all that stuff. So yeah, it's awesome. Detection Lab is probably your next best bet.
Yeah, that's a good way I would recommend too. It's a good way to prototype or test things there without actually touching production ever. You can run Detection Lab on a single VM with, I think you only need about, I think it's 8 gigs of RAM and like 60 gigs of space. So it's pretty compact and really performant for just some very basic testing. It's really, really cool. So huge shout out to Chris for pulling all that together.
We had a quick question come in from a Red Canary customer asking if they can whitelist a system so that we don't detect this stuff, and the answer will be no.
Yeah. We've actually had people do that in the past where they rename things to look like something we present in a webinar, and it never goes well. So, all right, awesome. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead. I think we're at like, as far as like measuring coverage, just wanted to talk a little bit about, so we've run the test. Are there any other questions on like how to either create the test through like a manual process or using some of the automated execution frameworks. If there's no questions here, I'll kind of move into the next phase. I think we're probably okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah, so one of the things that we like, I put a shout out here to the Flare VM. This VM is really awesome. So in addition to putting down some of the tools and things in like Detection Lab, the Flare VM is really a reverse engineering focused VM. I put the link there, and you can actually run a bunch of tests, and you get a pre-instrumented system. And one of the things that's probably right out of the gate the easiest to collect logging from these tests is just using some of the built-in PowerShell logging. So we put in different markers along the way for tests. I did just observe today that we just put the time. We don't actually put the UTC time or the date. So that's a fix I'll go make. But that's a simple way to actually see, like, when you run a test, the output to the standard out would be essentially like the name of the test on like 481. It would actually then describe the description of the test that you had put into the YAML file. So if you need to change that for your organization, any of that stuff would then be pulled in and run through the logging piece here. Here you can see we're just going to do a simple process dump using a sysinternals tool. Except EULA, almost always a really good signal when you see that on the command line. It means someone's running a sysinternals tool for the first time, and it may be someone trying to avoid that message box popping up. But that's like one of the things that we want to do in Atomic, and we really want to get feedback from the community, is additional reporting. But I did want to show you that right out of the gate with some of the different VMs, or even if you turned on PowerShell logging, we do output quite a bit of details about the test. And any output that the tool itself would write out would be included in there as well. So other reporting would be, it's so dependent, I think, on different environments. Some of our customers will use our portal. Other customers are using different products or tools to collect telemetry. They may go look in their collection tool, but all of that's really, really pretty variable. But probably at the end of it, probably sooner rather than later, we'll have a component that will do a little bit more logging, so you can then map that execution back to your systems that have of record that collected the data. So I think those are some of the main things we had at this point. I'm not sure if there's anything else. We kind of talked a little bit about taking threat intelligence from a group, mapping that to some tests. I'll kind of open it up at this point if there's additional questions or comments. Hopefully.
Just a question. Did we or are we publishing a chain reaction for this?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll publish the code, the script that we had. So I'll publish this PowerShell script that just simply enumerates all of the techniques for that group. And then that one's a pretty simple one. And then we've got a chain reaction coming as well as a commit. So that will be out. Should be out by the end of today. I think we'll be able to get that out there. Yep.
Sweet.
Other questions?
There's yeah. So another one just came in related to like kind of pace or frequency of testing. Like I think this is more of, I guess, an operational question. Do we perform these tests continuously? Perform them periodically? Like, what's the right tempo?
It's a good question. I'll probably give everyone a chance to answer that because I think we all have opinions on that. But I think for me, there's one level of testing where you just want almost a heartbeat or a ping. You don't necessarily want a detection, but you just need to make sure something's making it all the way through all the moving parts. So those would run at a pretty regular interval because sometimes systems go offline. They freeze or seize up for whatever reason, and so you may lose something there. And then I think as you do more aggressive testing, I don't have a specific model for like cadence on that, but I would say like weekly, monthly. I mean, it just depends on the size of your environment. What you don't want to do is have people get fatigued from testing and that interrupt like production. But I'll turn it to Mike and Keith. They probably have more insight on like those intervals than I would.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, probably going hard at the beginning, dropping everything you can, or like running all the tests from Atomic in a way, execute everything with our script, and just see where your coverage is at. And kind of depends, like, is your end goal to like build out this coverage in like a sim, or to confirm you even have coverage, like you're logging the right things. So I would take from like that gap, almost that gap analysis from that main execution, kind of go through, run through, find where you need to fix things, make things better, rerun that large test, see where you guys stand again. You know, as you get better, your coverage get better at that point with Atomic. And then from there, as you become more familiar with Atomic Red Team, begin to build out your own test, maybe add more teeth to them to better understand, you know, like if you run real Mimikatz in the environment with Atomic Red Team, you know, what pieces are you seeing or are you not seeing based on Windows event logs? You have the right things being logged from that perspective, and just kind of go down that list. Yeah, it's just tricky. Like I see it more as like, if I was doing it live today in an organization, I'd probably be using it a lot to build out coverage in my organization, to really see if we have the right logs going in and validate we have the right coverage for, you know, Mimikatz being loaded differently. Do we have the right command lines being monitored, different process execution, things like that. I think it just depends. I think all three of us will have different words on this, which makes it good.
I mean, I think, like, you know, very holistically, you know, the way that, at least the way that we kind of approach these things is, you know, if new research, new Tradecraft, new tools are published, you always want to go like validate that the thing that you already have works, right? So we might already have coverage for these techniques, but, you know, to Casey's point earlier, like none of these things happen in isolation, right? So whenever there's new information or new research, even if you think that you have coverage, it never does any harm to go, you know, like see if there's anything new that you need to change in terms of your like testing methodology, and then like B, fire it and see if it works, right? And that's very much the like the security operations bent of the testing, right? Like make sure that events get to your analysts, make sure that they make the right decision and that you know to respond. But yeah, there's definitely, you know, a lot of the reason we created Atomic Red Team in the first place, right, was just like at a very, very basic level, like make sure that this stuff is on, right? And we've seen Atomic Red Team get used time and again in different organizations, just to make sure, like Casey also alluded to this earlier, right? Just to make sure the data pipeline works, right? You can kind of like set aside detection and just make sure that if you fire these events, like these tests downrange, like did you get telemetry from them or not? Like completely separate from whether like alerts went off or things got prevented. But, you know, do you have any visibility into this stuff? And like those, I think that's kind of like more of that heartbeat methodology that you alluded to, which is like it can never hurt to validate like constantly the data is flowing. Because a lot of the time, like there's plenty of times where you miss things. Like there's plenty of times where like we in every enterprise misses things, not because you don't have detection coverage, you don't have a great ops process, but like just data was missing where you expected that you'd have data, right? And so validating those assumptions are important. Actually, that was somebody just posted over in the Q&A, like a related observation, which is like after EDR, EPP upgrades, they always rerun their testing because they found that sometimes like you just make a software change and things don't work the way that they worked yesterday, right? And so it very much back to kind of like that unit testing or functional testing cadence, right? Like, you know, if you change a thing that might impact visibility, like go rerun your tests.
Yep. Yeah, we've also seen, I don't know if we mentioned it, but we've seen a lot of people use this in POCs of products too. So when we wrote Atomic, it's not specific to Red Canary or any of the things that we monitor. So this is really a tool that you can use to, just collect, you know, because the one thing you want to do is test well, like not just download a piece of malware and run it. A lot of the detections in some of these products are behavioral based. And that could be another use case, not specifically related to the timing and frequency of tests, but it's another place we see people using the tool.
We have one more that just came into from Stacy, and so asks a really good question related specific. This is really specific to Windows, and I actually feel like I've seen something like this before, but you all would know better than I. Are there any resources that attempt to pull together things like the Windows Event IDs associated with techniques, right? And so the thought is that you can kind of like in the same way that, you know, kind of try to roll up telemetry expectations associated with a technique. Does anything exist on, I guess, more like the platform side where you can say this technique generates these Windows IDs so that people that have that type of like defensive telemetry can use it for detection?
That's a really good question. And off the top of my head, I don't know of anything specifically that today that maps Windows event IDs to techniques. That there may be, but why don't we take that one? At least I'll take that and find out. I don't know, Mike, if you know of one that does that kind of mapping.
The only thing I think of is Sigma might have some rules built in here, but the only thing I'm finding is a lot of command line stuff. So you might be a little bit more focused.
Yeah, I was trying to think through whether these things exist. You know, for folks that haven't seen it, and it's kind of tangential and maybe not directly related to like the answer to this question, but like the alerting and detection strategy framework from the Palantir team like accounts for a lot of this stuff, which is, you know, and their approach is a little bit or much more holistic, right? And very similar to the approach that like we use for kind of like detection coverage and things like that internally. But effectively, where like you define like a profile of a thing that you want to find, and then you've got all of this defensive telemetry that you can kind of like roll up and codify. And so like the Palantir ADS framework really does like, you know, that's a really good thing to study, just as kind of like, you know, if you're thinking about how you would take stuff like telemetry that you get from Atomic Red Team on the like process or network side, and then start adding in like arbitrary data sources like Windows Event IDs being a great one. So
yeah, that's really good. Good question. We had a couple of other links come in. I think we'll just review them and then make sure we're good. But I think there's some other references people are sharing, which is awesome. So
yeah, the one that just there were a couple that came in. One I hadn't seen before, but the like malware archaeology is like a really good reference point. Again, not so much for correlating event IDs to like an actor or a technique, but it's like a really, really great resource for just kind of like event IDs that tend to matter for detection and incident response.
Nice. Cool.
One more that came in. I don't know if either of you, Mike, you might have had some experience with this. This might be the last one we have time to take, related to any experience mapping like Qualys IDs to attack IDs. Not super familiar with Qualys as a product. I don't know if you or anyone else is, but this is one of those times where I wish we could just open it up to everybody on the line. I'm sure we've got somebody out there.
No, I don't have experience with that one. It's an interesting question. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think that's it for all the Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, we'll close it out. It's Friday afternoon some places, so hopefully you guys have a great weekend. We know your time's valuable, so thanks for spending a little bit of time with us. And if you have questions, again, just to kind of reference our atomicredteam.io page has a lot of good resources. Thanks again, and I think that's all we got.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate all the questions and all the input for the folks that are still on, which I think is pretty much everybody. If you did submit a question or posted a link or anything and want to shoot me a DM, I'm just Keith on Atomic Red Team Slack. I'm going to go through this afternoon during happy hour and ship a bunch of socks and shirts. So yeah, appreciate everyone's input. Thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Cool.
You guys
Cheers.
have a good day.